Imagine someone asking you, hey, want a stable job with decent pay, respect from society, and maybe even some real power in the government. Sounds great, right? Now imagine the next part. You just have to let us cut off your genitals first. Welcome to being a eunuch in imperial China. For over 2,000 years, from the earliest dynasties through the fall of the Qing dynasty in 1912, eunuchs were a fixture of the Chinese imperial court. Tens of thousands of men underwent castration to serve the emperor and his family. Some became powerful, wielding influence that rivaled government ministers. Most lived lives of pain, humiliation, and regret. And it all started with the cut. Let's talk about what actually happens, because this is where most people's understanding stops at they were castrated without grasping what that really meant. In China, castration for eunuchs wasn't partial, it was complete emasculation. Both the testicles and the penis were removed. Everything. You're left with nothing but a small opening to urinate through. The procedure was done by specialists, men who'd performed it hundreds of times. You go to their shop, a place that smelled like blood, infection, and fear. You'd pay them, often your entire life savings or money borrowed from family. This wasn't done by the palace for free. You paid for the privilege of being mutilated. They'd tie you down because you're going to freak out. They'd ask you one final time if you're sure, because there's no going back after this. Then they'd take a curved blade and in 1 or 2 quick cuts, remove your genitals entirely. The pain was beyond description. This is happening without anesthesia, without sterilization, without antibiotics. You're fully conscious while someone cuts off your sexual organs with a knife. They'd plug the wound with a pewter plug and wrap you tightly. Then came the worst part. For 3 days, you weren't allowed to drink water, not a drop. The theory was that this prevented infection and helped the wound close. The reality was 3 days of agony, dehydration, fever, and the very real possibility of death. About 30% of boys and men died from the procedure itself or from infections in the days after. 30%. That's not a small risk. That's nearly 1 in 3 people not surviving. If you made it past those first few days, they'd remove the plug. If urine came out, you survived. Congratulations, you're now a eunuch. If nothing came out, the urethra had sealed shut and you'd die slowly of urinary retention and kidney failure. Talk about death by piss. Your severed genitals were preserved in a jar. You'd keep this jar your entire life because you needed to be buried with it. The belief was that you needed to be whole in the afterlife. So you'd carry around a jar containing your pickled penis and testicles as a reminder of what you gave up. You're probably wondering who would voluntarily undergo this. The answer is desperate people. Most eunuchs came from poor families. Crushing poverty where you couldn't feed your children, where there was no future, where starvation was a real daily possibility. In that context, castration and palace service looked like opportunity. Eunuchs received regular salaries. They got housing, food, and clothing. They had job security in a world where most people had none. And there was the possibility, however slim, of rising to real power and wealth. Some families castrated their young sons, sometimes as young as 6 or 7 years old, seeing it as an investment in the family's future. One son's suffering could lift the entire family out of poverty if he became successful in the palace. The decision was often made by fathers, not the boys themselves. You're a child and your father tells you this is happening. You don't get a choice. You don't understand what you're losing until it's already gone. Other men castrated themselves as adults, usually in their teens or 20s. They'd weighed their options and decided that a life without genitals was better than a life of back-breaking farm labor and starvation. That's how desperate things were. Life inside the Forbidden City. So you survived the cut. You've healed, more or less. Now you enter palace service and discover what you actually signed up for. The Forbidden City housed thousands of eunuchs during the Ming and Qing dynasties. You're at the bottom of a rigid hierarchy where your life depends on pleasing those above you. Your first years are brutal. You're doing the worst jobs, cleaning chamber pots, scrubbing floors, carrying water, emptying waste. You're essentially a servant to servants, because even among eunuchs there's a pecking order, and you're at the bottom. You're living in cramped quarters with dozens of other eunuchs. Privacy doesn't exist. You sleep on hard beds in rooms that are freezing in winter and sweltering in summer. The food is basic, just enough to keep you alive and working. The physical effects of castration are hitting you now. Your voice hasn't deepened if you were cut young, or it's changed if you were cut as an adult, becoming higher and softer. Your body hair is sparse. You're developing fat deposits in feminine patterns, hips and chest and face. You look neither fully male nor female, something in between that society finds unsettling. You can't grow a beard. This matters more than you'd think because in Chinese culture, a beard was a sign of masculinity and dignity. You'll never have that. Your smooth face marks you as less than a man. The urination situation is a nightmare. Without a penis, you can't control the stream or direction well. You're dealing with constant dribbling, wetness, the smell of urine that clings to you despite washing. Other people notice. Other people comment. You're marked as a eunuch by smell as much as by appearance. Many eunuchs developed urinary tract infections regularly, painful burning, blood in the urine, fever, and the medical care available was limited and often ineffective. Incontinence was common, especially as you aged. You're wearing padding, essentially adult diapers, trying to manage the constant leaking. The shame of this is immense in a culture that values dignity and self-control. Let's talk about the psychological hell this entails. You can't have sex, not in any conventional sense. Your genitals are gone. Some eunuchs tried to maintain sexual relationships with women using fingers or objects, trying to please a partner even though they couldn't experience intercourse themselves. But these relationships were complicated and often unsatisfying for everyone involved. Many eunuchs sought out other eunuchs for companionship and intimacy. What that looked like varied, but it was driven by isolation and the need for human connection with someone who understood what you'd lost. The psychological damage of forced or chosen castration is something nobody in ancient China really addressed. You're dealing with trauma, body dysmorphia, loss of identity as a man, and nobody's talking about it. Nobody's helping you process it. You just have to function and serve and pretend you're fine. Depression was rampant among eunuchs. Suicide rates were high, especially among those who never rose above menial positions and realized they'd mutilated themselves for nothing. You're also dealing with the constant knowledge that you're despised. Regular men see you as pathetic. Women see you as something pitiable and strange. You're useful but not respected, necessary but not valued as a full human being. So there's a power dynamic, and here's where things get complicated. Some eunuchs became incredibly powerful. Because eunuchs couldn't have children of their own, they were seen as less threatening to the dynasty. They couldn't establish rival family lines or claim the throne. This meant emperors sometimes trusted them with sensitive tasks and information they wouldn't trust regular officials. Eunuchs served as personal attendants to the emperor. They had access to the inner court where regular men weren't allowed. They heard conversations, witnessed decisions, knew secrets. Information is power, and eunuchs had access to a lot of information. Some became chief eunuchs, running entire departments of palace operations. They controlled who got access to the emperor. They managed finances. They commanded eunuch armies. They accepted bribes from officials who needed favors. The most successful eunuchs accumulated massive wealth. They had mansions outside the palace. They adopted sons to carry on their name. They lived in luxury that most people couldn't imagine. But this success came at a price beyond the obvious one. You had to be ruthless. You had to step on other eunuchs climbing the ladder. You had to flatter, scheme, betray. You had to become the kind of person who sacrificed others to protect your position. And even at the height of power, you were still a eunuch, still physically incomplete, still mocked behind your back, still one imperial whim away from losing everything. Sadly, we have to talk about the ones who didn't make it. For every powerful chief eunuch, there were thousands who lived and died in obscurity. Men who underwent castration, served for decades in menial positions, and died with nothing to show for their sacrifice. You're 60 years old. You've spent your entire adult life emptying chamber pots and scrubbing floors in the palace. Your body is failing from years of hard labor and the long-term effects of castration, bone problems, joint issues, hormonal imbalances that cause all sorts of health complications. You have no family of your own, no children to care for you in old age. Maybe you adopted a son, maybe not. Either way, you're facing death alone, still carrying that jar with your preserved genitals because you need to be buried whole. Was it worth it? The pain, the humiliation, the loss? You traded your manhood for survival, and maybe it was the right choice given the alternatives. Or maybe it wasn't. You'll die wondering. The fall when the Qing dynasty fell in 1912, the system of palace eunuchs ended. Suddenly, thousands of eunuchs were out of jobs. The palace that had been their entire world was closing. Many ended up destitute. The skills you learned in palace service don't transfer to regular life. You can't get married and start a family. You're too old to learn a new trade. You're a castrated man in a modernizing China that has no place for you. Some former eunuchs became beggars. Others found work as servants in wealthy households. A few managed to hold on to savings and lived out their days in relative comfort. The last imperial eunuch, Sun Yao-ting, died in 1996. He underwent castration in 1911 at age 14, just before the dynasty fell. He lived the entire 20th century as a eunuch, watching the world modernize around him while carrying the physical and psychological scars of an ancient practice. In interviews before his death, he said if he had the choice again, he wouldn't do it. The pain wasn't worth it. The loss wasn't worth it. He'd rather have lived poorly with his body intact than rich as a eunuch. Being a eunuch in imperial China meant trading your genitals, your sexual function, your physical wholeness, and a huge piece of your psychological well-being for the possibility of a stable job. Most eunuchs never achieved power or wealth, they just endured. They survived castration, lived with constant physical complications, dealt with social stigma, and died knowing they'd sacrificed something irreplaceable for very little in return. Even the successful ones, the powerful chief eunuchs who wielded real influence, paid a price that went beyond physical. They lived knowing they'd mutilated themselves, that they were incomplete, that their power came from being seen as safe precisely because they were neutered. At least the job security was good,